Hello and welcome to the Grand Line Review, your source for everything One Piece. My name is Liam and we have big things to talk about, be they swords, mothers, or news. All of the big things are here in this big chapter. The out-of-context summary for which is as follows. It has finally happened. In a shocking twist of events, quite literally shocking that is, two members of the worst generation have combined their worst powers into the best powers. Because that is how maths work. You take two negatives, you multiply them, you get a positive. And then according to mathematics, that positive then goes on to commit elderly abuse because our Giga Granny is all but done for. Unlike Charlie Lavender, Charlie's dad, and Joe Mama, a tight-knit family unit who all did the amazing thing of pressing the subscribe button for the Grand Line Review, which will result in consistent injections of One Piece culture being administered directly into your YouTube feed. And if you'd like to be our next subscriber of the day, then hit the button and please do say hi in the comments below if you are a new member of the Grand Fleet. Welcome. Right, so I don't know if people truly comprehend the magnitude of this chapter just yet, but it's entirely possible that an Emperor of the Sea has just fallen. And like Humpty Dumpty is tumbling all of the way down. This is something that has not happened in One Piece since 2020 when the non-bearded beard man succumbed to a case of death. And I guess the first thing we should really be asking ourselves is this the end of Big Mom for the raid? I said is twice there, which made it sound awkward, but the question still stands. And it's entirely possible that the answer is yes. Law and Kid's fight has ended quite similarly to Zoro and Sanji's actually. They beat King and Queen with one final attack to cap off each chapter, and then it was the following chapter that confirmed that they were actually out of the conflict, via unceremoniously dumping them off the island, that is, which Big Mom is very set up to do. Law made a big ol' hole in Onigashima, and I guess in Wano in general, and it's unclear how this plays out, but it looks like Kid shot her through that same hole, and yes, it does make me slightly uncomfortable to be discussing the potential of Big Mom's holes, but here we are. Knowing who and what she is, I still find it a little bit tricky to buy that she'll be knocked out. I feel like the best you can do with this unstoppable force is to just knock her away like Team Rocket blasting off again, that kind of scenario. And this chapter only reinforces that to me because one of the subtle yet kind of sickening things that I loved was when Big Mom turned her own bones into homies. Like it makes my insides legitimately squirm a bit, but it was so damn cool. Such a unique take on healing as well, like, oh damn, my arms are broken. Guess I'd better turn them into living, breathing Disney creatures that scream, yes, mama, inside me. That was the clear solution. But still super creative, and it just gives that little extra step of knowledge as to why such a person has been so invincible for so long. Because even if you're not scared to the point of having your soul instantly stolen, and even if you can break her impenetrable outer shell, any damage you can cause will just instantly be healed through miscellaneous soul magic. It's insane. She is insane. And especially because you get to see a multitude of ultimate attacks in this chapter. You know, there's the fun elemental sword, and then there's even like a summoning of a giant fire lightning lady who I think is a reference to Mother Carmel, because they both have this little, look, I'm gonna be honest, I know nothing about hair, but they both have this little poofy doofy thing on the side of their faces, and it's always nice to see little details like that layered in. I do think that Big Mom is in a bit of a slightly unfortunate situation though, as per usual, because I do think that this is her defeat. But I can understand that it might seem a bit underwhelming because the only other emperor we have to compare it to is Whitebeard, and that is still one of the hardest hitting moments of epic emotion to have ever occurred in One Piece. And I think that in the minds of certain parts of the fanbase, the defeat of an emperor needed to play out on that sort of scale. Whereas I've personally been trying to lower my expectations with Big Mom because one, Wano is not her arc. She's not going to be treated the same way as some sort of Kaido. And two, and this is one, but two, because she's generally quite the neglected emperor. With that said, putting her down was quite the spectacle. And I think this is a chapter to remember for Trafalgar Law fans. In fact, I think this might be my favorite Law chapter to date because it delivered on so much that we've been building with him. Firstly, remember that it was his idea to take on an Emperor of the Sea. And even though that was but a clever ruse to like smack a flamingo up the butt, it's still kind of bringing the beginning of this alliance full circle. Secondly, and this often gets forgotten, but the will of D strikes again. Trafalgar D Waterlore has conjured up a rather nasty storm, and seeing him push his devil fruit abilities to the extreme was also incredibly satisfying. So a kind of, I guess, sort of issue I tend to have with Law is that I think his devil fruit is just too strong. It just is, which is why Oda needs to make all sorts of narrative excuses as to why Law can't just end fights with a snap of a finger. That, or just conveniently forget that Law can do certain things like body swap people. But 1039 felt like Law was completely unrestricted. He finally has an opponent that allows him to go go all out with the insane Ope powers, and it was visually stunning. And I particularly love the part where we cut to the basement and Yamato caught sight of the sword. Yamato's just there desperately trying to stop the destruction of Onigashima, which could happen at any second. And then there's just a sword. Like, imagine if the sword had hit the bombs. If I were Yamato, I would be crapping my Kozuki Oden-inspired pants. And then we also had the shot of the sword landing on mainland Wano, and I was just waiting for a rule of threes thing to happen, where maybe the next panel we saw was a shot of the entire island of Wano with the sword running through it, kind of like back on Punk Hazard when we zoomed out to see that Law had just sliced an entire mountain in half. And sadly it didn't happen, but it was still pretty awesome regardless. When you really think about it, Law is kind of Big Mom's natural enemy, and potentially even Kaido's. Their whole thing is about having such tough bodies that damage just can't actually get through to them. And Law very conveniently just bypasses all of that, which I think is why he and Kid made for such a great team in this battle. Because Law is dealing internal damage, which allows Kid to deal external damage, which in turn allows Law more chances to do his Law thing, which lets Kid have chances to do his Kid thing. And it all just compounded in a big mother-filled hole in the ground. I also really enjoyed their bickering. Kid and Law have an almost Zoro-Sanji style relationship where it appears that they've both kind of begrudgingly accepted Luffy as their superior, so now it's all about fighting for second place. And after being ordered around by Luffy, Law is in absolutely no mood to acquiesce dominance to Kid. One of my favorite parts was when Law actually called Kid out on his ability, saying pretty much exactly what I said last chapter. You just keep doing the same thing over and over with different metal animals. And in the end, I also think it's important to note that Oda gave this duo something of a balance, because yes, Kid got the final attack in, but Law took the last words. He was the one who got the satisfaction of saying, "Your era is over, old hag." Just without the old hag bit, because Law is quite the polite boy. And of course, there are all sorts of questions surrounding Law now, most of which are probably answered by, look, maybe just don't think about it too much. Because realistically, Wano doesn't take place too long after Dressrosa did. We're talking maybe a month. So if you really wanted to, you could ask, well, when did Law develop this awakening? Has he had it the entire time? And if so, why not use it against that pesky flamingo? And the best answer is, again, just don't think about it. The last month of events in the One Piece world have taken the last 8 to 9 years of real world time to tell, so we just need to accept that people can evolve. One very interesting thing that people pretty much immediately flagged is that the new anime opening seems to either contain Law or Kid's final attack. And look, I'm not convinced that this isn't a coincidence, if that double negative makes sense. However, the anime has actually spoiled the manga in the past. Very notably, the over-the-top opening to the Keen-Eyed spoiled that Kyoshiro was Denjiro long before that revelation actually happened in the manga. But in regards to this one, I think it might be a coincidence, even if it does look pretty stunningly like Kid's attack in particular. Speaking of, and this is the other kind of unfortunate thing about Big Mom, I think that she got one of the weaker opponents from our protagonistic cast. At least in my opinion, which, might not be worth much, but I'm still not entirely behind Kid. And to explain why, let's contrast him directly against Law. We've had Law on our side for over a decade now. We've explored his past, we've beaten his demons, he has a clear connection and rapport with the rest of the crew, and in general, he's just a well-rounded character, which is why it's so satisfying to watch him push those limits and evolve into something even greater. Whereas with Kid, he's just kind of been there. What I really would have loved is a flashback from him, and I'm assuming the reason why we're not getting it is because he's tied to something even bigger to come later on. But to me, he just lacks that little bit of oomph that, to be honest, even Big Mom has. We know her history, we understand her tragedy, so it becomes quite the pleasure to watch her face off against Law in particular, because it's a culmination of two completely separate storylines interacting. And Kid just doesn't quite reach those heights to me. And the only reason why I particularly care about him is through Killer. Killer's belief in Kid is what keeps me on board. Kind of like Ace and Luffy, really. Prior to the flashback, Ace was just another guy who was there, but I only really cared about him because Luffy did. With that said, he certainly did perform. Kid's flashy electromagnetic cannon was really cool, and it was great to watch him use the assign power to strategically position Big Mom, because the more I think about it, the crazier that power is. As it should be, because it's an awakening and it costs a butt ton of stamina to use. I don't know though. Of the three combatants in this fight, Kid definitely feels like the weak link to me. What I did love about this fight in general though is that it was a pure Devil Fruit showcase. Because recently in One Piece, we've been hyper focused on Haki, and the solution to every problem is generally, well, I guess I just need a stronger or a different Hakis. But in terms of this fight, it was all about pushing Devil Fruit abilities to their limits. We saw two awakened abilities and Big Mom's ultimate insane soul prowess that really harked back to a more classic sense of One Piece, where it was more of an exercise in seeing how weird powers clash and interact with one another. Now, of course, that can work both in favor of the chapter and against it. I've definitely definitely seen a bit of criticism that Big Mom, someone who does have out of this world haki, just maybe should have used it. Like there's this particularly, I'm gonna go ahead and say pathetic panel, where Big Mom is just repeatedly hitting Law with haki infused fists, and it looks like they are doing nothing to him. She's definitely not hitting him with Conqueror's haki and perhaps not even with advanced armament. And not to take anything away from Law for tanking these hits, but it definitely doesn't feel like an attack from the same person who knocked out Page 1 in a single hit. When it comes down to it though, I'm enjoying the continued themes of generational shift. No matter how it occurs, what we're seeing here is the end of an era. The worst generation is stepping up, and after we get out of Wano, the world is going to be completely destabilized. It's also a pretty nice commentary on complacency. Right up until the end, Big Mom was insisting that she could not lose. And the reason why she couldn't lose was simply because she was Big Mom. There was no other reason needed. She and Kaido and the other emperors, I guess, have ruled the seas for decades now, and because that's just how it is, in her mind, that's how it will always be. The sheer arrogance of that mindset is a glaring weakness in and of itself. It took both Big Mom and Kaido far too long to take any of what's happening now seriously. Both of them have even had the opportunity to flat out kill Luffy, but they both chose to keep effing around, and now, as a result, they're both finding out. Just like how you're finding out about this next video, because there's always more to learn, explore, and experience with this wonderful series, so I look forward to seeing you there.